There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here with Allan Radcliffe, a queer Scottish writer, to talk about his second novel, or novella. We can talk about what word he prefers, coming out November 13th, that I have just finished reading an advance copy of, called Blurred Faces. Allan, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me back, Sean.
You were so prolific. If you keep up at this pace, we're going to be talking quite often. This is great. I actually finished reading Allan's debut, The Old Haunts, which came out in 2023, in early 2025, and we had a lovely chat about that, which I will have linked in the show notes. And now here is his second book, Blurred Faces. Tell us why it's titled Blurred Faces, Allan.
I think to answer that properly, I would have to talk a little bit about the kind of genesis of the book. Interestingly, with my first novel, The Old Haunts, I had a very strong image in my head, which turned out pretty much to be the cover of the first edition of the book, of these two figures in a forest, walking through the forest with the trees on either side. And it was almost like a kind of an image from Hansel and Gretel. And the idea that I had in my head was of an adult child who had recently been bereaved, who had lost both his parents, and how you navigate your way through the world without your parents, as children do in fairy tales. So this was a very clear image that came to me for that book. But with Blurred Faces, I had so many different ideas kind of washing around in my head. I wanted to write about Edinburgh. I wanted to write about memory. I wanted to write about queer love in middle age, or maybe early middle age, and people who had a past and had ghosts, and how they came through that to form a kind of an intimacy with each other. And I think that the only way that I was able to get a purchase on all of these ideas was actually the form of the book. When I decided that I was going to write it as monologues, sometimes contradictory from both perspectives, that was when all the ideas came together. So you have the character of Jordan, who was bullied at school, and he has left Edinburgh, and he works as a teacher of English as a foreign language, and he's toured all over Europe. And this is him tentatively making a return. And the other character is Davy, and he's the one who stayed behind. And in the first chapter, they come together. They've met on a dating app. They come together basically for a one-night stand. And it's only as Jordan's getting dressed to leave that Davy realizes that he knows Jordan. They were at school together, and not only were they at school together, but Davy was part of the gang that bullied Jordan. But Jordan doesn't remember Davy at all. They then go off into their separate lives, but they're repeatedly drawn back together again, and this kind of fragile intimacy blossoms between them. And the title, Blurred Faces, really came out of an image that I ended up using more than once in the book, which was the image of a child in memory, and the idea that our memories are imperfect. So the faces that we see are not in razor sharp focus. Quite often they're dreamlike or hazy. But there was also the kind of alternate meaning for me of a blurred face is a face that is aging and is no longer, perhaps, once you get into middle age, your face wears its experience, doesn't it? So there was that idea as well of a face that was beginning to change. I like that as a title. And of course, when I write things, quite often it's the title that comes last, having written and worked on the text, and then suddenly you're mining through it to see what and then the title suggests itself.
I resent part of that explanation where you talk about people looking older and wearing their experience on their face because you look younger than the last time I talked to you. Damn it all.
It's the filter on the camera. That's the Vaseline on the camera.
I'm not going to touch that one. So, Alan, read us from the opening, please.
Okay, so this is Jordan's voice, which opens the novel. David lives 1.07 miles away. I walk the blue line on the screen of my phone, the usual thrill and shame in my belly. I keep stopping to look at myself in car windows and worry at what's left of my hair. His address turns out to be a cul-de-sac off New Haven Road that's barely on the map. Jordan? David? He's waiting on the fourth floor landing, half submerged in darkness. You found the place okay then? The legend across his chest reads, Ingleston Truck and Trailer Fest 2004. The only way is truck. His hair's a different shape than it was in the pictures. It makes loose waves above his face. The colour seems almost blue-black until I get close and see the white asserting itself through the dark mass. We're in here. He smiles, brackets appearing either side of his mouth. I was half thinking of opening a bottle. The back of my neck ripples as I duck through the doorway. The temperature seems colder in the hallway than it was on the landing. The only burst of colour comes from the nameplate stuck to the door on my left. Rory's room. He sees me looking and makes a half-arsed attempt to prise the sign off the door. I rented this place out to a family with a 3-year-old, he says. Feel like a visitor in my own home sometimes. The theme of austerity extends to the kitchen. The surfaces are bare. As he rootles in one of the cupboards, I spy a pint glass, a couple of mugs, eggs cups, a child's plastic beaker. The red stands within easy reach. He pours himself a half tumbler, then lets the bottle hover. I've diluting juice, tea, coffee, if you'd prefer. Water's fine, thanks. Slange? We face each other like gunslingers with our feet apart and one hand thrust down our trouser pockets. We're as butch as John Ireland and Monty Clift in Red River. The stance lasts just a beat too long before David yields, dropping his hip. My knee gives a twinge of relief. Come on then. He's a man of few words, cute and shy in his vintage tee, eyes off to the side. The bedroom that's not Rory's room is white and empty, with a cornice like fancy cake icing around the ceiling. I note the gunmetal grey curtains, the smart backdrop to the selfies he posted. His breath's fresh with the drink. I flinch, but his scent isn't unpleasant. My crotch is tightening. But before we can find a satisfactory rhythm, David peels away. Won't be a sec. I stand in the middle of the floor, kneading the front of my trousers, unsure where to put myself, trying to tune out the bright sound of David peeing on the other side of the wall. With a pang, I remember I offered to cook tonight. Niall will be getting in from his work. He'll change into trackies and sit for a while at the end of the couch, thumbing through his phone with a podcast for company. Or he'll do some work on Rebecca's bedroom, peeling the tape off the skirting, fitting together the chest of drawers. In about half an hour, he'll start rummaging through the fridge for something edible. Luckily, my brother can make a meal out of dust and water. I hesitate, then take off my shoes and socks, which I line up at the end of the bed. A patter of rain from outside, and I see myself suddenly, a middle-aged man barefoot in a stranger's bedroom, and the absurdity of the image makes me crush my hand to my mouth to stifle a giggle. Here we are. Bare feet spark against the floorboards, urgent now. In one movement, he's tugged his t-shirt over his head and thrown it to the end of the bed. Nipples like midget gems. His body's hairless, save for the ladder running down from his belly button. He slaps a palm down on his stomach and jokes that it would take him 9 months to grow a beard. I laugh too, but when I don't move, His eyes shift sideways. This is what you want, right? Oh, yes, I say, with just a touch too much conviction.
Just lovely. So let's talk about genre. Are you calling it a novella or a novel? I don't have a paper copy, so I don't know what the page count is.
Yeah, it is actually quite a bit longer than my first novel, The Old Haunts. I call it a novel, but I'm not wedded to either, really. And I would say that in the process of writing anything, I feel that a story finds its length. And I definitely found that with The Old Haunts. And I certainly found it with this book as well, is that you get to the end and that's that. And then actually the kind of word count and number of pages is the last thing on your mind. There are obviously different editions of books that are probably really quite small books, but the print size is enormous and they're double spaced, so they can pad it out to extra pages. I've heard that the new Harper Lee book is
Oh, really?
along those lines. But yeah, I call this a novel, but I'm not precious about, I don't feel offended about people referring to it as a novella.
So this one has two first-person points of view. And am I right in remembering that there was only one in The Old Haunts?
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
So what was that like, moving from one point of view into 2 points of view? Were there special difficulties? Was there a special reason why you? I think there's an obvious reason. There's two main characters, although The Old Haunts also had a couple. So I'm curious about all that stuff. Point of view.
Yeah, I think that I'm a real admirer of theatrical monologues. And what I worked as I'm still work as a journalist, and I was a theatre critic for a long time. And I've always been a big fan of monologues in theatre, in fiction as well. And I think that there's a real richness to first person writing. In some ways, people talk about unreliable narrators, but I think any first person narrator is unreliable because the perspective is so subjective, isn't it? I really love the monologues of Brian Friel and Conor McPherson, Irish writers, and also Scottish playwright David Harrower, various others. And I really like the idea of having a story told from two overlapping perspectives, but also somewhat contradictory at times as well. And as I said before, once I decided to tell the story in that way, the writing flowed much more easily. The biggest challenge really is you have to inhabit these characters. You have to be in their heads in a very intimate way. And there were times during the writing when I would catch myself writing something and thinking, Jordan wouldn't say that and he wouldn't think that. So there was a lot of that process of going back over the voices to make sure that the individual voices were consistent. Because occasionally a kind of Davyism would stray into a Jordan chapter and vice versa. So that was maybe the biggest challenge. In a way, it's that you have to really get to grips with the minutiae of these two individual voices.
Tell us more about the two main characters. Why don't we start with Jordan? We're not going to do anything spoilery here, but just give the viewers a taste of who these characters are. Jordan is the older of the two. He's 42.
Yeah, I wanted the two characters to be distinctive and contrasting, not just in terms of their voices. They were obviously from very similar backgrounds because they were at school together, but I wanted them to have distinctive personalities and distinctive voices. And in a way, Jordan is the one who was bullied at school pretty relentlessly. And he also had a difficult home life with an alcoholic father. He grew up with his brother, who he comes back to Edinburgh to live with. And they have a very close relationship, although his brother is also a recovering alcoholic. And in a way, I think that Jordan, he's not just running away from his childhood experiences at the hands of bullies. He's running away from the baggage of his family as well. At one point, he observes that when they were growing up, his brother was the much more kind of confident and outgoing and sociable person, whereas he was much more introverted. And his brother seemed the one who was set to fly free in the world. And it's curious to him that actually it was Jordan who ended up traveling the world and getting out, escaping his background. But in a way, Jordan has been on the run from his childhood. He hasn't engaged with it. He didn't engage with the death of his father particularly. He has a kind of fairly distanced relationship from their mother. And although he clearly still loves and admires his brother, he is frightened of getting too close to him, I think, and having to see him fail again. And Jordan's, I suppose, lifestyle is reflected in the fact that he's a runner. He's been a runner since he had to run away at top speed from the bullies, and he's still running, although he's injured, hence the dodgy knee that he currently has.
As the story opens, he's just home for a family visit from London, right?
Yeah.
He's lived in many places in the world teaching ESL.
Yeah.
And he identifies with Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, traveling far away from home and so on. And that comes up at least a couple times in the novel, which I loved. Anything to do with The Wizard of Oz, I prick up my ears. And in fact, this was really important. He says about his mother, who was quite a character. She's known me in these years as a leave taker, a runner. It's what I do. I knew from an early age that I would depart on the first passing cycle.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's why The Wizard of Oz it's one of the reasons why The Wizard of Oz is so resonant with queer people, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Along with, other escapist type films and stories, there is the sense that we would all like to be lifted up by a cyclone and dropped somewhere as colorful and camp and gorgeous as Oz.
You do such a fine job of distinguishing between the two voices are very distinct, the personalities are very distinct. And one of the things that I just loved about Jordan was that he was I don't know if you would agree to this description, but an oversharer. He's always opening up a little bit too soon and then apologizing for it. And we see him throughout the story. He's, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have, it's too soon for me to be talking about my father's death or whatever. And I just thought that was a very endearing quality.
There are people who feel that social pressure. Davy is very taciturn and he keeps his cards close to his chest and he's very quiet. And I think that Jordan is the type of person that has to fill those silences. And in a way, it relates back to his reluctance to come to terms with being back in Edinburgh and the kind of feelings and emotions and being with his brother and his family and all the rest of it. And so he will happily open his mouth and waffle on about anything rather than have to confront that silence.
And as a segue into talking more about Davy, it's from Davy's perspective. This is a short, direct quote that Davy thinks Jordan is a bit of a Bobby Dazzler, which is a lovely word I didn't know. Tell us what that means.
I don't actually know I think a Bobby Dazzler is maybe a phrase that comes from the 1950s. What it basically means is that it's talking about someone who's always well turned out and smart. I remember when I was a kid that adults used to say that to children if they were dressed up for a party or something like that. Or your grandparents would say that to you if you were wearing your Sunday best. Oh, you're a right Bobby Dazzler. So it's a kind of an old-fashioned thing to say, and it's quite quaint, I suppose, but it's also very complimentary and endearing.
I loved it. Yeah. Tell us more about Davy Locken.
Yeah, so he is the one who stayed behind. And through the novel, from Davy's perspective, we get the gradual backstory of his involvement with this group that targeted Jordan when they were at school. And we get the impression that Davy was certainly not the ringleader of the group. He's not that kind of person, but he was definitely up to his eyeballs in it, and he certainly enjoyed himself as part of this group. Needed in some ways to hide his own sexuality and his identity by conforming and being part of this group of bullies, basically. And so he is gradually opening up about some of the things that they did to Jordan, but he's also, because his own memories are unreliable, he's sometimes not entirely sure if this happened at that time to Jordan or if this was someone else that they were tormenting at the time. But he clearly has a huge amount of regret and guilt around this. And he's not that person anymore. And I suppose that the question, one of the kind of themes in the book that's embodied by Davy is this idea of personal change and how easy it is to change your life and to move on and become a different person. And of course, these two men are both searching in ways for some kind to put some kind of closure on the past and to move on and have more fulfilling lives, and certainly greater intimacy and more fulfilling relationships. Davy has been in a relationship since he was very young, so since he was in his 20s, with an older man. And they've split up, they've separated, and it has been, from Davy's point of view, quite a long, drawn out, deliberately drawn out separation because they've been together for such a long time. Davy can't bear to move on from it, really. He's stuck. And I think that meeting Jordan is the catalyst for him beginning to cut those ties and to see a life beyond Frank, his lover. And I think that we also get glimpses through Davy's interactions with Frank of this relationship as not having been an especially fulfilling one at all times.
This whole theme of kind of reinvention, it shows up in other parts of the book. And so one of them is that Frank, is he about 10 years, 15 years older?
Yeah.
At a place where he's just lost career-wise or whatever, that really changes him. And so there's a sense of a stall in his life. And you do use the word uncoupling, which of course makes me think of Gwyneth Paltrow's phrase, conscious uncoupling. But they're really still enmeshed, both in terms of Davy still goes over and hangs out with him and spends the night there. He's really having trouble just making the final cut. And that's explored quite vividly in the novel. Davy, near the end of his first night together with Jordan, he remembers him. He twigs the memory that this was one of the people that and the bullying was homophobic in nature, right? How old were the characters when that bullying, it was the teenagers, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Now they're in their early 40s. And so then throughout the novel, he's got this secret and doesn't really know how to, because Jordan doesn't remember him. And that was a really powerful and painful part of the story. And it just, I think many gay men, certainly me, I remember being bullied, but I also remember bullying other kind of gender nonconforming classmates at school, male and female. And as I've gotten into my adulthood, I've had a chance to apologize to those people and make peace with it. But it's a really powerful theme. Yeah.
I think I was really eager because when I started conceiving this story, originally it was all going to be from Jordan's point of view. And in a way, that felt a little too easy to write it entirely from the point of view of the kind of the victim of the bullying. Don't get me wrong, I'm a really big fan of Margaret Atwood's novel Cat's Eye.
Me too.
Yeah, and I think it's one of her best, if not her best books.
Absolutely.
And it's entirely narrated from the point of view of the girl Elaine as an adult looking back and remembering her torment at the hands of this group of girls. And it's very subjective. But I actually, in the end, thought it would be more interesting to consider both points of view, that of the person who was bullied and why they were susceptible to these bullies, but also the person doing the bullying, because I think that we can all relate to the idea of being swept up in bullying, whether it's actively kicking the hell out of somebody or just being a bystander and not calling out the bullying. And I think for children, it's very difficult not to fall into some kind of bullying at one point or another, because hierarchies among children are constantly changing. And one minute somebody's at the top of the pecking order, and the next minute they're down at the bottom. From my own perspective, I feel like the most frightening bullies I've met were adults, whether as a child or as an adult myself. I've been much more worried by the behavior, the kind of bullying behavior of adults in my life than when I was at school. I feel like I was definitely teased and bullied as a child, but it wasn't anything in the end that I couldn't handle.
I was horribly bullied as a kid by other kids. So yeah, I really related to that part of the novel. And also fascinating the way that you put meat on the bones of his family life and complicate the portrayals, especially of his father and his father's descent into alcoholism, because he was, until that descent was completely, there was no turning back, quite a defender of his son, and recognized him as not like his older brother. He was maybe not into the girls, I think was the phrase. And his mother doesn't really know how to deal with the bullying. There's a wonderful scene about her making an intervention, but feeling a little bit unsure about how to deal with it. So we'll let the readers discover that, but I really appreciated all of that. So the alcoholism, I'd like to put this quote out and then see what you want to say about it, because this was very intriguing. And this is Jordan. I'd read my way through the single shelf section marked Scottish literature and belatedly realized how predictable our family was in many ways. How unsurprising its reticence and drinking men. Can you riff on that for a bit?
Yeah, in some ways, it's certainly true of Scottish literature that there are a lot of books about families with alcoholic fathers. And the book that was voted the most popular or the greatest Scottish book of all time is Sunset Song, and that is absolutely rife with women having to cope with the behavior of the men in their families, whether through alcoholism, violence, or a kind of abuse, or a mixture of all of them. So in a way, I was just pointing that up, really. And when I was at school, Scottish literature wasn't really taught as such. So if you wanted to read about your own country, there would maybe be like a sort of thin selection of books on the shelf, whereas nowadays it's baked into the curriculum. I was interested in pointing that out while also maybe drawing a contrast with my own book, which is about men. The protagonists are men, but it's about them working towards tenderness and intimacy, whereas a lot of classic Scottish literary depictions of men are about fisticuffs and violence and drink.
And that drinking and that reticence is also such an important part of the novel. So you've got it all, the tension between the various modes of being in the world. And then on the other side, Davy, he's being a younger partner in a long relationship with an older man and not quite untethered from it. The issue that I think he's dealing with, one of the issues, is becoming his own person and being alone. He says at one point, I just don't know how to be alone. And also, is he ready to make a new relationship with Jordan? There's an intriguing line that I think is from a nursery rhyme or something. After he's thinking, I think, of their first hookup. There were 3 in the bed, and the little one said.
Yes. And I think that in that context, Davy would be the one being squished out of the bed, because he is in some ways like the man that got out of the empty car in a way. He seems like someone who wants to make himself invisible in a way. He always wears the same jacket. It seems almost like a kind of either a cross between a suit of armor and a kind of disguise, like an invisibility cloak. And through his relationship with Jordan, I think because Jordan is more outgoing and he is more of a sort of social person and he's gregarious, it does bring Davy out of himself in a way, and it feels that he's lost his sense of identity in his previous relationship. He identifies himself almost exclusively as being Frank's other half. And in the scene when they go out, because there's a scene where Jordan and Davy go out on the town, and when they go up to the barn, he catches sight of himself in the mirror. He's had his hair cut for the first time in a long time. And he sees them in the mirror, and they're quite the contrast. And he thinks he looks like he's trying to hide. And it takes a kind of superhuman effort for him to bring him out from behind Jordan. So I think there is a sense of him both wanting to be in this relationship with Jordan, but also wanting to find out who he is as a person.
And there's an important long section, and we're not going to say anything or very much about its importance to this inchoate couple, Davy and Jordan. But Jordan wants to walk up, and correct my pronunciation, but walk up the crags.
Yes, the crags, yeah.
And so I'd like to end by talking about the other main character in this novel, which I think is the setting, Edinburgh. It's so vivid. I feel like I've been on a trip to Edinburgh, and this chapter or whatever is particularly wonderful. So we're not going to spoil anything about what they're talking about particularly, but can you take us on a walking tour of the crags, Allan?
Yes, so the crags, so Edinburgh is built on a volcanic plug, and so the crags are it's surrounded by hills, and Arthur's Seat, which is the, I suppose, part of the volcanic activity that existed at one time in Edinburgh, is right in the city centre. So you have, in the centre, you have the Royal Mile, the Edinburgh Castle at the top, Holyrood Palace, and the Scottish Parliament building at the bottom. And right next door to that is Arthur's Seat, which is this basically a big hill that everybody goes up on New Year's Day. And people run up it, and the Edinburgh Marathon used to go around at one point. And there's a big park at the bottom, but they also have the crags, which is they're like stairs of rock that go up and up towards Arthur's Seat, which is the peak. And yes, so Davy and Jordan have this kind of walk through the old town of Edinburgh, and then they decide to go on up the crags, which is challenging for Jordan because he has his injury. But there's a sense of them, the blind leading the blind, they're pushing and helping each other all the way up. The great thing about and should you ever visit Edinburgh, there are all these hills in the city, and it's a great way to just get a look at the city, and you can see not only the landmarks, as in all the grand buildings and everything, but you also see the layout of Edinburgh and the contrasts. And so, of course, you have at the centre the Royal Mile, the kind of medieval part of the city. And this is where not only are all the kind of regal buildings and all the kind of heritage sites, but it's also where and all the closes that come off the Royal Mile are full of slums. And they have ghost tours going up and down. So you get that sense of the kind of Gothic atmosphere of the old town. And then around that, you have the new town, which was Georgian and is very salubrious. And then on the outer rim, you have all the kind of suburbs, and you also have some very impoverished estates. So you get a real sense of that wheel within a wheel that Edinburgh is, and all the kind of contrasts inherent in the city, the duality of the city. And I think it was a nice place for them to continue their journey, because the book in a way is about one of the ideas in the book is this idea about contrast and duality, and it's something that runs through a lot of Scottish literature as well. Let's not forget that Jekyll and Hyde was written in Edinburgh, and some people, although it's nominally set in London, some people think it's basically Edinburgh, it's Old Town. And things like Confessions of a Justified Sinner, all these books. And I really like the fact that this story is rooted quite specifically in its setting.
Absolutely. Blurred Faces. It's a Bobby Dazzler of a second novel, Allan. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
What are you working on next? And will we be having another for your third novel? Will we be meeting here in about 8 months, or what? Where are you at?
Yeah, I am writing something. I suppose that what I would say is I have an idea and I've started writing something which is not set in Scotland. It does not have a first person narrator, and the main character is not a gay man. It's a kind of, I suppose it's a bit of a departure in a way.
Just a bit.
But I hope that it's at that stage, it's very early stages, so I would very much doubt that we'll be coming back together to chat in 8 months, although I would happily come back and chat about other things. But it's good to have something to think about. The run up to a book coming out is very exciting, but it can also be a bit heady. And it's nice to be able to go back and spend time actually doing some writing as well.
That's exciting. This chat will go up on your pub date. Good luck with all the book launches. I know you've got a bunch of them scheduled, so you're going to be busy. It's been wonderful to chat with you about Blurred Faces, Allan. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean.